Welcome to Couch Church, where we take the plastic off of the living room furniture. That's right, we're sitting on grandmama's couch so we can discuss the issues at the crossroads of Christ and culture. Hey, this is Ojame Bago coming to you from Couch Church, where we explore the intersection, the crossroads of both Christ and culture. That's right, here is where we take the plastic off of the living room furniture. I hope you have enjoyed this March Madness Mental Health Matters, as we have discussed the intersection of what it means to be Black in America and deal with mental health. Today, we're going to do a recap. And here's what I need you to do. I need you to write in the comment section what it is that you like, what it is you didn't like, and even some other things you want us to discuss or touch on. We want to hear from you. And then we want to make sure that you join us next month for the month of April as we deal with music's influence on culture. We're going to be having some heavy hitters on the couch, and we're going to go deep and go wide as it relates to how music has impacted us as a people and where we take our cues from. Make sure you join us on all social media handles at Centerpoint DMV. Be sure to like, post, and comment. Keep coming. Keep watching. Keep involved as we continue to sit on your grandmama's couch. Peace. So you know what we do. We always ground our discussions in a biblical text. And today our biblical text is Proverbs chapter 12, verse 25. It simply says, anxiety in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. One of the ways that God shows us how God cares, of course, for you and I, is through scripture. It's through prayer. It's through worship. It's being a part of a local assembly where we gather with other peoples of like-minded faith. But it's also through a great therapist. And so we understand that mental health is an incredible, important, yet sometimes overlooked issue, particularly in the African-American community, from the tremendous stress that is caused by the intersecting identities of race and class, economics, education, housing, and food, even to a lack of mental health care and resources for the Black community. Mental health support for the Black community needs to be addressed. Here's what I want to start today's conversation off with. Dr. J is the author of Copeology. Copeology, Exploring Coping Techniques, by Dr. Joanne Frederick and friends. I do have a chapter in the book.
Yes.
But let's start off like this. Dr. J, how do you define mental health?
All right. Thank you for that question. And thanks again for all of you all having me here. And hello, everyone. So, how do I define mental health? Mental health is a range. It ranges from poor to well. And we all are somewhere in that range. And so, if we're looking at poor mental health, that means that when life crises come and stresses come, we're dealing with it in a very negative way, like drinking, smoking, partying, gossiping. That's how we deal with our stress. And a healthy mental health would be doing things like paying attention to our sleep pattern, our how we're eating, how we're staying physically active, how we're communicating, how we're asking for help. So mental health again is a range.
Help us define stigma in some layman's term so that we can be able to identify what they are.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So we hear people use the word, oh, mental health stigma. What does stigma mean? Stigma is a negative association by individuals or society at large for certain things that's related to mental health, like substance abuse disorder, trauma, anxiety, depression, Normally those are the four main things we have this stigma against. So if someone has been diagnosed with any of those or struggling with any of those, it's negative. That means that this person stay away from them or don't talk to them, don't be in a relationship with them. Don't and those stigmas prevent that individual from seeking help, from even talking about this is what they're dealing with.
which is different than mental illness.
Correct. It is different than mental illness. Yep. If you notice both terminology, illness sounds more negative and health is more positive. So when you look at mental health, there's positive ways to deal with mental illness.
I'm thinking because in my work with some government agencies around behavioral health, I recognize how terminologies are changing. So where we once said substance abuse is substance use,
Yeah, substance use disorder.
right?
Yes.
Rather than a substance abuse, which has this negative twist
Yeah.
on it, then it has a stigma attached to it where people don't want the service because you're focusing on the negative aspect
Exactly.
of whatever it is I'm going through.
Correct. And people don't even want to identify with that. So we even call that a self stigma. Because so stigmas could be from society and other individuals, and also what we put on ourselves, our own bias and beliefs about things that we ourselves are struggling with.
I had a quick question as you were saying that, and you were talking about depression, and we look at mental health versus mental illness. When does the poor mental health become an illness? So when we look at depression or anxiety, because some people are on medicine for prescription drugs for depression, but is that also, like, where does that fall?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just excited that we're having this candid conversation. People don't get healed or look for help or even know help is available until we start telling our stories. So I appreciate you talking about me, like how it
Right.
impacts you. And so when we use the word mental illness, so clinically we're using what we call the DSM-5. It's our clinical Bible. Everything is in there. There's
Clinical Bible.
Yeah, clinical Bible. There's diagnosable. And so your question is like, when does a mental illness turn into mental health, or like how it relates, I think was the
Yeah.
question. And so if we're looking at mental illness, we're looking at one of the diagnoses. So let me say a mental health issue. Let me use that word. And I think everybody have a mental health issue. I do, whether it's
Yeah.
in the book or not. It could be anger, rage, again, gossiping, to depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. But there's various ways to treat it. It's all treatable. And I usually say there's only 3 ways to treat it. It's talk therapy, where we are talking about it. It is medication, which you were referring to, because we can take prescribed and monitored medication, and our depression will go away just like that. And the anxiety would minimize itself. So that's just 2 ways. And the third way is both. Sometimes we need talk therapy and we need medication to function normally, whatever that means.
Right, whatever
Whatever that means.
Whatever.
People
What
like
is
the word.
normal these days?
Whatever
I
that
need to
means.
define that.
People like the word normal, but what is normal? Like,
See,
that's why I
Dr.
say-
J, I saw eyebrows go up when you talked about like addictions, and you were talking about gossiping.
Yes.
And I ain't saying nothing. I ain't throwing nothing
Don't start
out.
gossiping on
I
the
ain't
couch.
I ain't saying nothing. But I'm surrounded by beautiful.
Don't even
You about to get in trouble.
I'm about to-
Go ahead.
that was-
Go ahead.
What
don't get booted off your own couch.
But what I will notice in the relationships that I'm building with these women on the couch, and even you, Pastor, we don't have a big time for gossiping. Like when we having our conversations, when we're all separate in our spaces, that's not really something that we do. And I think that's a character flaw that people doesn't recognize can be a mental health issue.
It's
I
an
never
issue.
thought it would.
Oh man,
It's an issue. So it's not in the book that I was just talking about, right? But that is a problem. I mean, one theorist that we, study from, Sigmund Freud, you've heard that name. One of his theories was like things that happen in our childhood affects who we are as adults, and oral fixation, and one of those oral fixation is gossiping. I'm just kind of, bringing it to terms of a transition from the book and this European psychologist to what it looks like in our community.
We could put it where the ghost can get it. Your mouth like water. You know, come on out.
So it is a problem,
it's a
right?
problem.
Would you say gossiping is a problem
Oh,
for some
definitely,
people? I
definitely.
mean,
Oh
okay,
yeah, definitely.
All
I've
kinds of
seen it.
problems.
Yeah, and not only is it a problem for the person doing it, it's a problem for the people that they're hurting behind it.
True,
This could be a
true,
trigger
true.
for someone
man.
else's.
It
The
is.
people around them.
Oh
Or
yeah,
even
that has
receiving
hurt.
it. Like,
Yeah,
you
that has
dumping
hurt.
on.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's true. Because sometimes you could be having a positive day, things are going good, and someone brings something to you that messes up your whole way of thinking and being in that moment. And then, so what do you do with that? Do you tell the person, hey, I don't want to hear that right now? Do you change the subject, or do you listen and get involved? You know, off camera, we were talking about creating boundaries.
Yeah.
That's a way when we need to create boundaries that work for you in your space, me in my space.
And some people don't recognize that's what they're doing and how bad it's affecting the people that they're doing it, or they're dumping their souls out and trying to talk about what's going on. But I've seen a very negative impact with me when listening to gossip.
Yes.
And then I set that boundary and no longer talk to individuals too much that, that gossip, because I don't want that in my spirit.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So let's talk about that individual. What has happened to them? What are they going through?
A lot.
What has not happened? Thus, this is the way they latch out. So it could be something from childhood. It could be any trauma. It could be any hurt that they've experienced.
Yes.
It could be them dealing with stuff and trying to distract from it, from it. And so they'll put that attention on other people by talking about other people or other things.
They're trying to mask some of their own hurt
Could
or
be.
guilt and shame
Could be,
by
yes.
pointing out the the areas of concern in somebody else's life.
Exactly. It could also be related to low self-esteem, low self-confidence. So we bring other people down. And again, it could be unconscious. I don't think the person is sitting there like, oh, I'm going to do this today. Maybe, but most likely not.
So Dr. J, how do we become aware of how we show up?
Yes. Sometimes it might be hard for us to know how we show up. But my neighbor next to me, it's okay to check in. Like, hey, what you think about when I walked into the room? Like, did I do too much? Was I too introverted? Give me some feedback. But also, it should be someone that you respect and
Yeah,
trust.
'cause, you
Not your
can't
player
go there,
hater, because the
right.
player hater is going to be like, child, you need to sit
Girl,
somewhere.
right.
No, you want somebody. So that's how we could check in. It's okay.
Yeah, some of the challenges that I have experienced and even witnessed is how to recognize triggers. And sometimes we think triggers are those things that set us off, and it can be the simplest of things.
Yes, let me talk about triggers. Exact definition you said. Something that elicit a response from us. What triggers can be a scent, a sound, a person, a light, a place. But it takes us back to some place that we've been that was negative, where we had to defend ourselves. And so that trigger has us to defend ourselves in that moment. And that defense can be something we say or don't say, because sometimes we withdraw. It can be a reaction, a statement. And so we do get triggered. But we have to know what our triggers are. Sometimes your trigger could be an in-law, a family member, a place.
Not my mom, my mother-in-law. You're not my trigger. If you're watching this, you are not one of my triggers.
Right. Exactly.
So
It could be anything.
let's talk about coping mechanisms.
Coping mechanisms.
I wanna poll the couch, to find out what coping mechanisms do you have in order to maintain a proper mental health. That's the best way to say it,
Yeah, I
Dr.
like
J.
that,
Yeah. What are
yes.
your coping mechanisms to maintain a proper mental health?
My number one is prayer. Has to be.
Yeah.
Listening to gospel, taking it back during the time during the gospel. Also, when it was like Tamala Man, Yolanda Adams, those old songs. That has to be my first coping mechanism. My healthy one. because I've overcome bad ones. Yeah.
Excellent.
Mine is take a deep breath, and then I normally start holding the conversation with God, like He's sitting right here next to me on the couch, because that's how I feel sometimes. I'll be like, hey, I need you to come here.
Yeah.
Come here, Jesus, for a minute, because you got to help me do this. And when I was younger, I lived right across the street from Fort DuPont Park, so I would actually go over, just remove myself from the hood and go over there to the park, fresh air, going for a walk, just talking with God.
Yes.
I think for me, in addition to like meditating and praying, I had to learn to disconnect. Because I went through a period where I had really bad anxiety, and I didn't know it was anxiety.
Right.
I did not know. I thought, oh, wow, something not right in my body. What in the world is that? And it wasn't until I actually went to the doctor. I thought like I was having some issue with my heart. And the woman kept me, I'll never forget this because it was a turning point in my life. I was having like chest pains and just issues, but in my work life, it was just piling up. So when I went in to get checked in, she took me up and took all these different tests. She was like, stress tests and stuff. She was like, you're fine. But while she was texting me, I had like my phone in my hand. I was doing work, and she was like, ma'am. And she said, give me that. She said, you don't need to stay overnight. She said, but I need you to stay in this room and relax, because you don't know how to disconnect and relax. And she said, I'm tired of seeing young black women coming in here thinking they about to die, and it's really just stress because you don't know how to disconnect. And this, I believe it was like an angel of God sent. This woman just began to minister to me in that hospital about just being present and letting go of everything and focusing on me. She said, because if you don't, you are going to die. Whether it will be physically, mentally, or spiritually, she said, something is dying because you don't know how to disconnect. She took my phone from me and was like, just relax. And she said, the funny thing is, I don't even think you know how to do that. And I was like, my medical coverage ain't bad for this lady.
Mind your business.
But it took me on a journey to number one, understand and identify. The anxiety didn't look like what I thought it looked like in my head. Like, it wasn't. And also to begin to like say, okay, God, show me how to relax so I create time for myself and understand that to not feel guilty with this self-care, right? And it is really an act of resistance in some ways. Audre Lorde talks about that, right? And so that's what I do. So now I incorporate scriptures or meditative. There's this thing I watch on YouTube all the time, and I just play it, tell everybody to go, and I relax, and I come out like.
I'll say there's also a stigma against crying. We're not supposed to cry, especially a man, especially a black man.
That's right.
You can't cry. And so if someone is dealing with depression and they're sad all the time and they're lonely and they cry or want to cry, they hide themselves from crying, because if I cry, it means that I'm weak. When crying is expressing an emotion that needs to come out, it's okay to cry.
How do you see, like, in your body of work, especially because we put that so much on our young men, how have you seen in the long term that has the effect that it has had on that, with them not crying, then you see these grown men walking around that have never, what have you seen in that?
Yeah, what I see is them walking around with pain, and the pain turns into anger, and then the anger is violence. So when we see people robbing, stealing, hijacking, cursing, carrying on, maybe even a short temper, all of that relates to the pain that they're going through, whatever it is, that they haven't had a chance to express it appropriately and be accepted while they express their pain.
I tell you, I think Scarface says it best when he says, you never see a man cry
So you say the man
till you seen a man die. And I think that is both literal and figuratively. That if you want to see a black man cry, go to a funeral of somebody that he loved. And that may be the only time where his emotions are uncontrollable, right? The other is more literal, that at the point in which a black man decides to die to self and to die to the expectations that the world and society has placed on him. The tears are of joy. One is of sadness, but the other ones are joy, because now I'm free from the burden of expectations that other people have placed on me my whole life.
I can only imagine how that feels that you can't cry. Like, how does that feel as a black man and you can't cry? Like, you just hold it in.
Yeah.
What
Now we
happened?
raise our children
Yeah.
not to cry. As soon as we see a child crying, especially a little black boy, what do we tell them?
Stop that.
Stop that.
cry.
I
Take
don't.
it.
I don't.
Suck it up.
I do not, because I learned differently.
Right.
I
Good.
learned to ask them, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Let's work through this.
Yes.
Calm down. What
Yeah.
can we do? Like, I've learned different techniques.
Yeah.
And I do pat my daughter up if she's crying and calm her down.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of people who do not parent like
Yeah.
that.
Well, let me tell you what else we do that sends the message, stop crying. And this is a therapeutic thing we've learned. Don't give them tissue. When we give somebody tissue, they're crying, we're saying wipe it up, clean that up.
Quickly.
You allow them, and don't talk to them either. You allow them to let that out. Sometimes even when we hug,
Dr.
we're saying,
J.
Yeah, let me tell you what I
Them kids'
saw.
tears be messy though.
I saw this the other day, right? I was in the store, and I guess he was like 2 years old, little boy, was running around the store, and he hit his head on the display. His father, probably about 30 years old, little boy, boom, you heard it. He crying. He jacks him up.
Oh, man, that would've broke
Stop
me.
crying. Didn't I tell you stop running around in this store? Set him down in a chair and then gave him his cell phone
to distract
to
from that
distract
feeling,
from the feeling, the hurt, the shame, whatever.
So what does that look like in the long run because it's interesting, I'm curious to see. So every time that person cries or goes through something, instead of addressing it, it's met with something.
Yeah.
So for him,
Comfortable to do it.
it's the phone. But I'm curious, like, what does that look like in relationships with that person? And
I don't think it was more so about the phone because the phone was a distraction for the crime so he can continue shopping.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, but I mean,
Right.
if it's not a phone, something else, but he's
Yes.
still giving him something for that.
Yeah. So, and part of it is embarrassment, right? Dad may be embarrassed. You embarrassing me because you're running and I told you to stop. That's your punishment. But what it looks like as you grow up, now we need other things to comfort when we get hurt, whether it's physically
Right.
or emotionally. And what are the things people do and use for comfort? Substances,
Sex.
sex, pornography, people, gambling, technology,
Food.
video gaming, food.
So you indulge. So every time that person,
And I think
instead of crying, they
it's
would
a
get something.
overindulgence too because
Yeah.
we can look at it in terms of individuals who work out.
Yes, that's another one. So
Right.
exercising.
And so people who go to
Yes.
go to the gym and
Yep.
then they come
Work
out a
it
year
out.
later looking like a muscle man.
That hasn't been one of my vices.
That hasn't, man.
Nah, see,
That might be an improvement. I
I
mean,
mean, I've tried it.
That
It just
ain't
didn't
work.
it didn't work out for me. I wasn't committed to it. I wasn't-
I think that what also needs to be addressed, and sometimes I feel like sometimes we down our people, but there have not been a lot of access and resources in Black communities all the time when it comes just healthcare, and you can take the whole umbrella
Healthcare
of
system.
healthcare system and
yes.
look at how it's applied in the Black community. So if basic healthcare people are having a problem with,
Yep.
when you get down to like, therapists and counseling sessions, first of all, your insurance halftime ain't gonna
Yep.
cover any of it. So now you're talking about a group of people who may be living in a depressed community having to then you tell me I gotta pay to sit
Yeah.
across from somebody
And
else.
that's
my generation. So just being raised in the 80s and 90s, people just don't believe in going to seek therapeutic services. So now they support, now they can see the difference. But at first, quite frankly, a lot of people that I had surrounded myself with couldn't understand why I sought services. So yeah.
how do we begin to address the stigmas? Because if we don't, then they're going to just remain and impact future generations.
Yeah, we address it by normalizing everything. We talked earlier, what is normal? Normal means that it's okay. It's okay that you've had a traumatic experiences. It's okay that, you're dealing with anxiety. People do, everyone deals with
Everyone
anxiety.
does. You just
It's
mask
okay
it.
that you're feeling depressed today or seasonal or for a long period. That's okay. But we need help when it's a certain thing happening. So if it's a long period, 3 months or more, if it's having an impact on work, relationships, family, we need more support.
So how does that normalization show up in other communities?
Okay, well, in other communities, and you're referring to communities that's not black and brown,
Correct.
how it shows up. They talk about it. There's poster boards. There's education about it. There's conversations. There are resource towards whatever the issue is, and the resources are financial, and any other type of resource, and that's how it looks in other
The
communities.
support.
There's support.
Moving from Ward 8 to Ward 6, that's the biggest difference that I see is the community that's being built in Ward 6. But the reason why you can build a community in something like Ward 6 versus Ward 8, I'm talking about your neighbors, is because you're not fearful to come outside. You're not fearful to have community meetings. You're not talking about violence. You're talking about how we're going to finance the PTA. So, some of the stuff that I see is so unreal. I'm like, where the real stuff? Because, again, those are two different spectrums. You got Southeast. One is Southeast in Ward 8, and then you have another Southeast. So you're not fearful or you're not living in fear or the economic
The
disparity.
economic level is very
Yeah,
different.
so it's
Yeah,
different.
the affordability.
Here's some other ways they show up differently. They're communicating in groups with each other. They're trusting each other. We don't trust each other. But we also know it's not our fault why we don't trust each other. I'm talking historically, right? We were trained not to trust the next person. But that is ways how they show up differently than we do.
And not only were we trained not to trust the next person, our experience taught us not to trust medical professionals.
Correct.
And so
Ooh, yes.
some of the challenges that I've come across is I can't find anybody who looks like me to provide services.
Yes.
And if I can find somebody who looks like me, I can't find a male that looks like me. And if I find somebody who looks like me and I find somebody who's a male like me, I can't find somebody who's Afrocentric in their approach to therapy. So they're still using,
You just took it down to 1%.
yeah.
At that point,
Yeah.
that last one, I'm like, woo, that's
Yeah,
gonna be a hard one.
and so the
Yeah.
the methodology, the systems, the approaches that they're using are not geared or germane for us as a people, and so that becomes a challenge to me, as a black man who wants to be centered in an Afrocentric spirituality, right, as it relates to dealing with my own mental health. As we understand that in the whole clinical and counseling profession, that is, less than 10% combined of African American men and women. And that's why it's so important that our
Yeah.
pastors and our
Yes.
ministers
Our
and our lay
teachers,
leaders
our-
and
yeah.
our teachers
Yes.
in schools begin to
To partner
incorporate this into
Teachers,
their
yeah.
into their
Yeah.
into their own education, right? Teachers,
Sunday morning?
teachers
on the weekday.
when they go to school should have classes regarding mental health,
okay.
a part of their certification.
Okay.
Clergy who go to seminary schools, part of that should be mental health classes.
If that's not a part of, or is that like
It's
an
not
elective?
Well, it's some schools may have some clinical tracks around chaplaincy and things like that.
But it's not a part of the main course.
It's not a part of the main curriculum, whether it's for clergy or whether it's for educators, right? And I think that we just need to, even for those who graduated from schools, we need to begin, as you talked about, create those spaces within our congregations. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to go back and get a degree. but you ought to have some type of training,
And care.
right? So you know
care
how
for
to,
people. That
right?
makes
You know
sense.
how to
That's what I
care
was
for
like,
people.
how do you
Just think about how many lives and children would have been saved if we already had this growing up, or if we implement it now within our education system.
Yes.
They will have someone to turn to. I don't remember not one incident, one time where I had that freedom to feel comfortable to go to an educator or to go somewhere in the school system and say, hey, I'm hungry. Hey, I'm depressed. Hey, I'm struggling. Because what was the outlet?
Yeah. And it's part of holistic care, right? We're caring for the whole person. So I'm thinking about kids, as you're talking about being hungry, and we're talking about just being in the school system, teachers, educators, principals. So the kid that comes to school that's angry and running out the building or yelling, we want to reprimand them. But really, what's going on at home? And even before that, did you eat today?
Yes.
And a space
Yeah.
come, let's do it. And I do
Antecedents.
see in schools, they'll do that, but we just need kind of more of that and realize that those behaviors is coming
Come
from
from
somewhere else.
Somewhere else.
The anger,
Come
the
from
range.
So we understand the potential risk of not addressing, mental health stigma, suicidal, self-harm, the feeling of rejection and neglect, to walk away from communities that you are a part of. So let's talk a little bit about how do we begin to put resources in the Black community, so in order to remove the stigmas that are attached around mental health. How do we begin to remove those stigmas?
Yeah. So our first resource is ourself. And one of the things we can do, which many people don't know how to do, is listen. And you don't just listen to what people say. We listen to what they don't talk about. And we watch their behaviors. That's how we listen. That's the first resource. Because everyone needs something different.
How do
Range.
we begin to be our own advocates or advocate for others? Because we've gone from churches to now school systems, even in the workforce.
In the
I think it would
yes.
be so great if companies would actually somehow incorporate this.
We have it at our company.
Yes.
We do have it,
Yeah.
social and emotional wellness. We have a wellness room.
Excellent.
Where
That's
you
what
could
I'm
go
referring
in for
to.
35 minutes.
Yep.
Really?
Oh
And-
yeah.
and sit down.
And just relax.
Yes.
And it has dim lights, calming music is playing.
Exactly.
So the-
Imagine having that
Can you
in-
bring a guest in?
No.
Oh, sorry. Imagine having that in the school system.
how do we
Or
advocate?
place of employment, or where else you said you was talking about us advocating. By ourselves.
Whether it's school, whether it's in your professional areas or church, but because I've seen models of some schools, I've just seen a few that have tried to do that with kids. I was reading about a program where they were actually teaching kids about yoga.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they were dimming the lights in the
Yep.
kids, and this was in a low income area, and they were
Yes.
noticing a difference in the emotional intelligence of their young Black students
good.
who didn't have a place to unload. And it brought me tears in
Yes.
my eyes in watching it, because on top of all this other stuff, we talk about the Black community, there's also a history of trauma because of what our people have gone through. And during COVID, don't forget, we had the George Floyd incident. Like,
Yeah.
and we're sitting watching, and we can't really move like we want, but we're then police brutality. And
Still.
we're dealing with all these issues
Yep.
on top of everything else. And I'm always like, how can we teach people to advocate for themselves, or how can we advocate for others?
Yeah. So number one, you talked about experiencing certain emotions and not having the words for it. It reminded me of a session I had with a young man, and he couldn't really explain. So I told him, draw it out, color it. Gave him coloring books, colored things to draw. And what he drew, I'm like, this looks like you had a panic attack. And he's like, well, what is a panic? And I described, that's what it was.
We don't
So
even know
we
what
don't
we're
have
going
the
through
words to say,
to
hey,
identify.
I'm feeling sad. So we have to train and teach all of that.
All of
To the people, to us, again, personally, doesn't matter the age range. How do we talk this through? And then what kind of help services? As you were talking, it reminded me of, if in every curriculum, whatever we study, there's a self-care course that identifies that. And that's from kindergarten, pre-K, up. That'll help. So we can advocate for stuff like that. Spaces where we can just step aside and be silent.
What about for parents who are in the home with their kids and dealing with
Yes.
teenagers, what
Yeah.
are some steps that they can go through in helping their children
Yes.
understand and be aware of
Yeah,
their
well,
cell
first is that they got to deal with their stuff.
First.
Parents, we like to say, because I'm a parent, we like to say, well, you need to do this and you're not doing this. But what is it that is going on with me that I've instilled or not? So they're doing it, but yet still I want to be a good parent and say, you need to do this. Like the parent who's smoking, don't smoke is bad for you, but they're smoking.
So it's like, do as I
even
say.
the parents, it starts with them.
Do as I say, not as
Yes,
I do.
yes.
You know.
And also with them saying, I need support. I need help. And the help has to come from outside of me. You ever try to tutor your own kid or your own family
I'm
member?
horrible at
Oh
it.
no, you gotta get
Pandemic
somebody else.
exposed me.
Yeah.
I am not a teacher.
You gotta get somebody else. You don't
I
have
heard
to
on
teach them.
Alexa. I was like, Alexa,
exposed
what's this
me.
answer?
We need help.
Help.
So the parents gotta ask for help.
So this has been a good conversation. I think we can end with it with in terms of the intersectionality between mental health and faith. That there are so many different programs and services that we can put into practice in the church. Whether it's a mental health clinic, whether it's through our therapeutic preaching or
reading a
singing
book.
or worship or creating a Bible study, around a certain topic issue. Or, I'll tell you right now, what's playing in my mind is, back in the day we had the sanctuary, then we had chapels. And people would go to the
Oh, that
chapels
was
for
like a
prayer,
meditation and
right?
prayer room.
And so what's playing in my mind is how can we take an underutilized space, a classroom, in our churches and turn it into a meditation room. And so with the blackout curtains, or with the steam or the rocks or the yoga mats or whatever, just as a way for people to recenter. Come on, y'all, what's some resources? Let's get this thing cracking.
So when we hear resources, people always think finances.
Yeah,
Right? Okay,
yeah.
finances is a resource. We can do that too. What if we gave or gifted people a session, counseling sessions? Whether it's pro bono or somebody sponsoring them to have a certain amount of sessions that they will pay for.
That is good.
Resources, finances. What are the barriers?
That's a
The-
good
the- the-
gift. If
the-
people will use it, that's
But I
another.
say the barrier is if that's the Christmas gift.
Right, I'm thinking
So-
that if
so
somebody
like-
gave you that as a Christmas gift,
They
here, girl.
I wanted to do it, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it.
But and I think
And it
what-
should be an agreement,
right?
Because this person need to be like, yeah, I need this.
But what you find happening
want
more in the black community are the coaching practices.
You see that?
So individuals are providing more
Life coach.
life coach, and people are going to life coaches, right? But I'm glad they're going to somebody. Life coaching is not the same as therapy and counseling.
Life
But it
is
can
not the
help.
same.
No, I mean it's not designed. It's not designed to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally separate. What I'm saying is at least a first step of a person who's saying, I need some help.
I need some help.
Yes.
And and so whether it's and so even in faith, there are faith-based life coaching practices, right? And so all of these, I think, are steps and resources that we need to take more advantage of and find ways of how we bring them to the community. Dr. J, as you said, we got to meet people where they are. We can no longer be the institution or the building or the ministry or the office as if we're the beacon on the hill.
Yes, yes.
And everybody sees us and everybody wants to come be with us.
Right.
We got to come down off our hill and go down into the valley where the people are so that we can give them the resources that they
Yep.
need.
Two more resources I can think of too.
Okay.
Books. There's a lot of knowledge in books, and books can be cheap. So sometimes, for example, if I'm working with people with low self-esteem, we actually find a workbook that deals with low self-esteem, what it is, what it looks like, and activities to build that. We call that cognitive behavioral therapy. And thus, when I wrote Copology, we wrote Copology, that's what it was about. Everyone can't afford therapy financially. But we'll pay $20 for a book and read in the privacy of our home and learn.
Right. We love to ground Couch Church in the biblical scripture. And today that scripture is Psalms 34, verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they shall not depart from it. This scripture highlights the importance of both guiding and nurturing our children to ensure that they develop into healthy and productive adults in our society. Today's episode is focusing on school-based mental health services, a critical area that affects the well-being of children and youth. Mental health challenges have become increasingly common in our schools, and the pandemic and other stressors have really increased this tenfold. I want to get right into the conversation today because we know that the last 3 years of the pandemic has had a detrimental impact on us as a people, not just as adults and seniors, but the devastating impact that it has had on kids. So I want to get right into this question in terms of recognizing and understanding what are some of the challenges facing school-based mental health services.
Well, some of the immediate challenges that we face are misdiagnosed children, and a lot of times they're misdiagnosed because their diagnosis may have changed, especially over the pandemic. Like, you know, there are people who watched their parents and close relatives die during the pandemic, and the services weren't really readily available from a lot of different places. Like, you know, I would say there was an overload of needed services. So there were different programs that were offering, like, oh, we can text this and we can text that, but a lot of them weren't free. And so if you had Medicaid and certain programs didn't accept Medicaid or whatever, it was just very underserved. And the process to get evaluated and to even accept help was really difficult because a lot of parents don't want their children talking about their business in the house. A lot of kids didn't want to talk to other people because, you know, they're in the house with the parents, and it wasn't really a lot of privacy going on. But school-based mental health was really difficult to get a hold of because it was so many. So they offered a lot of group services, and but individual services weren't readily available as often as they were prior to school closing because everybody needed it now. Like,
India, how long have you been an educator?
15 years.
15 years. So you have seen firsthand, not only as a parent, but also in a profession, right? The impact or the challenges that happen around school-based mental health services. In your opinion, has it gotten worse or better?
I'll honestly say it's a case-by-case situation. I can't say that it's worse or better. I would say that it's almost neutral. It depends on the child and it depends on the situation. There's so many conditions around the students' individual needs. Now, if I were to just speak on, do I think each child is getting what they need? No. There are so many gaps that need to be filled in. Like when it comes to having a holistic approach or giving them children the wraparound services they need, there's so many different little holes, sprinkles in this, and it's scary because I'm like, how do you think this child is actually going to grow or get the level of support they need if it's so many missing components? Like, you expect for a child to get coping strategies when they don't even get the services or some type of coach there consistently enough. They might see this person one time a week.
Right.
This child needed every day, something in their ear every day to help them along.
What do you all feel about educators taking mental health classes as a part of the degree in the curriculum to be an educator?
I think there needs to be some type of foundational level of training when it comes to school-based mental health. Everyone should have some type of training, some type of foundation from which they can work from to support these kids.
Are the teachers that are teaching your children, where are they coming from? Are they in their community? Do they even understand the issues that they're going to be handling? And so when you talk about an all across the board approach, we're really talking about reimagining how the school system
And that's
is
that's
as
a different
whole.
that's a different issue. So really, they're not even educators. That's not even what their degree is, but they can become a teacher and teach for 2 years or 3 years and get all
Take
their
that, go
student
someplace else
and get
and
all their
make more
student
money.
loans forgiven.
Oh yeah.
Right?
How you
That's
feel about that?
yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
I was trying to avoid that conversation.
I mean, it is what it,
But
it is. What it is.
I didn't
Right.
even know everybody knew that.
Yeah, absolutely.
As long as
And
you come and teach in the urban
And
area
for
a
2
certain amount of
years.
time, your student loan is.
So
Wiped out.
I
telling
only
me-
just found that out. Though.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, are you telling me that they...
yeah.
So when you see them there for a brief time,
Yeah, and
they
then
were
they
only
leave.
supposed
They ain't
to
got
be
no
there
long-term
until
investment.
that
No.
loan was
And that's the
covered.
thing. What is the investment? Like, this has to be your all-in approach to investment. You know, advocating for that. I
Well,
just
Let's come up with a list of some of the common challenges that children face around mental health.
You know how when you go to CVS, you get one thing and they give you this long receipt list.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they came. Man.
You've been hit by the CVS
The
receipts.
long list of receipt. The challenges in general are just no outlet.
No outlet.
That's the main. If I could sum no outlet. Even if it's just if it's not just no outlet, it's like no outlet. No, it's an outlet that they want. Like, we select everything for our kids. We like, you're going to this school. You really meet this friend, and this is who you get to play with. This is what you wear to school. This is how you're gonna get your head done. Like, we really don't give them a lot of choice
Freedom.
in the matter. And
Freedom of expression.
and that is important now. Like, that is important. One thing
Right.
that I tell parents, and I told a parent that a few parents that I've learned about, is if it's not in writing, it did not happen. That is my favorite quote ever. If it's not in writing, it did not happen. I say, stop having those front desk conversations, the hallway. I call them
customer
hallway
service conversations.
I
Ask
said,
for a manager.
stop having
Right.
them hallway conversations.
It's an email
Any
conversation.
conversations you had with them, I don't care if you finish hanging up with them, you email the next day.
I think what we need to provide parents is a list of support.
Exactly.
What they can and cannot do. And I think what we're talking about initially is how parents just need to stay informed.
That sounds like a green book.
A green book.
Yeah.
Right. That might be something you can put together, Miss Lawrence. You can put together.
As I said, in my agency, we have trainings regularly.
Yeah. So when
Right.
people who
Right.
are watching, what
That's
they need
important.
to do for their particular state, they need to go to their
Stay
state.
informed.
How? They're saying, how do I say their state education
Go to your
website
state
or their
education
State
agency.
education.
state education website,
Right.
and then they can find information there dealing with education.
Right. You
about
start with
what
your
right-
state education
Contact your
website.
local education agency.
Right. Then go
So-
to your local education. You go. That's your
You
job.
contact
Yeah.
your local education agency, and that is not necessarily restrictive to the state, because you know how we have Maryland, but then we have multiple counties.
Right.
So it wouldn't be your
Okay.
state. So
Right.
it'd be your local education agency. If you're Prince George's County, for example, you would go to that educational agency or
Okay.
the Office of the State Superintendent in Washington, D.C. to kind of ask them, like, what is it? Or you can go on that website and first look that way. But your goal would be to contact your agency so they can tell you where to get your resource from.
So the resources are out there. It's up to us as parents to connect in order so we can be our best supporters of our children while they are in the education system. I want to say thank you to Misha for joining us on the couch today. And of course, to the team, Lady Ebony, Minister in Training, Crystal, Minister in Training, India. Thank you all for joining us today. This has been a very enriching series for March Madness. Mental health matters. And so whether you are a student or a senior or just a average, ordinary person, know that your mental health is important. And so you have to tap into the resources that are available in and outside of your community so you can continue to be successful contributor to this world. We want to say thank you for joining us on today. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms at Couch Church DMV. Until next time, may God bless you, may the Lord keep you, and may heaven continue to smile upon you. Peace.